From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And coming your way today, K-State's Ignacio Ciampitti. He'll discuss double cropping, soybeans, or grain sorghum after wheat this year, covering variety and hybrid selection for days to maturity and adjustments to seeding rates, as well as what K-State field trials say about yield expectations from double cropping. Following Ignacio, then, K-State's Sarah Lancaster. She'll review the herbicide options for controlling those late-emerging weeds in wheat stands that could adversely impact the harvest. She'll focus on the efficacy of pre-harvest treatments and on those harvest waiting intervals for each product. And later, with another Stop, Look, and Listen, K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven. Here on Agriculture Today.
For information on threatening weather, you should depend on the National Weather Service and their broadcast on NOAA Weather Radio. NOAA Weather Radio is an all-hazards radio network that provides up-to-the-minute weather information, including life-saving warnings anytime, day or night. NOAA Weather Radio also broadcasts information on man-made disasters, such as chemical spills, Amber Alerts, or other national emergencies. For the National Weather Service, I'm Bill Curtis.
Welcome once again. This is the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. Glad to have you along. Well, the Kansas winter wheat harvest will be here in relatively short order, if our normal weather patterns hold. And this year, there may well be considerable interest in following that wheat immediately with a double crop. Two of the prime candidates would be soybeans and grain sorghum. So on this opening segment, we'll tap the thoughts of K-State crop production specialist Ignacio Ciampitti on succeeding with that double crop. Ignacio, thanks for being along with us once more. So right to it, what do you consider the principal things for the grower to think about as they settle on their crop selection for following wheat?
Yes, as always, Eric, thanks for the invitation. I think that one of the, I would say number one is usually the herbicide carryover potential. So, in fact, we are seeing even today, not even in double crop. I have seen a few fields in the last couple of weeks that they have some issues from herbicide carryover. So, and in many cases, we have some soybeans that they will do well, but depending on the soybean selection, that will be a problem. So, if you choose to use a herbicide that maybe is or a variety that is resistant to an herbicide, be sure that to match the resistant trait with a specific herbicide, no? Okay, that's one of the main challenges in terms of rotation. And make sure that you just know exactly, if you have a good record keeping, that's one of the main problems that we usually have with double crop, in terms of making sure that we know what is the herbicide that we used in the past. That's number one. Soybeans we have today, at least in terms of the options of crops that we can consider. Usually we discuss specifically in many cases about soybeans and sorghum. We know that the double crop area increased over time, and if we look at the last 5 years numbers, we can clearly see that we are seeing an increase on farmers that are moving from wheat, and then, in the sense of that they are trying to add soybeans into the rotations. If you go to central Kansas or south central Kansas, if you go down south, west, I think that you can start seeing farmers that they probably move to the options of sorghum as a double crop. When you're looking at soybeans, I think that the most relevant information is, depending on what type of soybeans, we have a few options. We have glyphosate-tolerant soybeans. We have a 2,4-D. We have a dicamba. So today we have a few options in terms of weed control. So I think that soybeans are very attractive also on that aspect. We know all the challenges that we have on sorghum into controlling weeds once it's established. But once we are in a double crop and after weed residue, sorghum can also do very well because we are giving really few chances for weeds to establish.
Well, let's dig into what you would recommend as the standards for planting a double crop after wheat for optimum success. And begin with soybeans, Ignacio.
One of the key factors as we are thinking about double cropping and the importance of double cropping, not only the variety selection, we need to think about some of the small points, for example, fertilizer recommendations. So in many situations, farmers, when looking at soybeans, they will just go ahead and they don't do any application. So, but we might be running low on potassium, phosphorus, so we need to check on those nutrients. For soybeans, nitrogen is not a problem, for sure. As long as we have any moisture, which will be another critical factor, or rain coming soon after planting, then we will for sure will have some nitrogen on the system. And then those soybeans, they will need some early season nitrogen. If you look at other recommendations in terms of row spacing and seeding rates, we usually say if we are planting double crop soybeans, narrowing rows is a good factor because it helps you to capture light, harvest light quickly. It helps you to cover the canopy faster to compete with weeds, and basically helps you to make sure that basically reduce any potential erosion that we have in those systems. So we are trying to cover as much as early as possible and compensate for the lack of time since we are planting already late. Mm-hmm. In terms of seeding rate, we always try to recommend to slightly increase seeding rates. When we are saying slightly increase seeding rates, it depends what the farmers are already using today. If a farmer is already on a high end of 140,000, 150,000, I don't think that there is a need to increase that seeding rate. If those farmers they are in the low end of 90,000 or 100,000, maybe there is an opportunity for increasing potentially 10, 15% in those very low seeding rates. And that helps because many of these plants will not have sufficient time to produce branches. And we depend on individual plants to increase the yields to produce more pods. So those are some of the considerations to think about soybeans. The long-term average for soybeans usually is around 20 bushels per acre, but we could be very surprised. We have situations in the past years that we even got in some places around 50 bushels per acre as double crop. So soybeans can be a very surprising crop.
One of the prime questions that does come up when it comes to following wheat with soybeans is what season length of variety does one want to select? There's this tendency to think in terms of a shorter season variety, an earlier maturing group. And what's your thinking on that, Ignacio?
I will say that usually, yes, I agree that there is people is always thinking about a changing variety. I would say if we change to a different variety, so even if we shift to an early maturity variety, then when you're planting early, it will result in very, very short plants, okay? And pods they will be really close to the ground. So for harvesting operations, very challenging, having these short plants. So sometimes, even trying to use the same variety or even using a slightly later maturity group, it allows the plants to develop a larger canopy, okay? And then that's what we need. We need some larger canopy before flowering. Don't go too late, because if we go too late, then we are moving the plant into a risk for not finishing, not maturing, and then having a problem of a frost, towards the end of the season. But if you think about kind of a rule of thumb, in your best case scenario, use the same variety that you already used in your field. And if you want to be tweak, if you want to think about how to fine-tune your systems and being more aggressive, maybe you can just try something a little bit later, but not too late that it will put you in a really bad situation, towards the end of the season, because you cannot finish the crop. So I think that the most important message is don't go with something short, because in many situations, if we go too short, we will not have enough biomass to produce yield, and then most of those pods, very short plants, they will be towards very close on the ground, and then operations at harvest will be very complicated by that variety selection.
Same question, though, on the grain sorghum side. That may be a bit of a different story.
Well, in many situations, and I would say unlike soybeans, when you look at sorghum hybrids, we really need to look at early maturity in those cases, because one of the challenges on sorghum is that we might be able, to produce biomass. We don't have any issue on that. But the main challenge, is more related to the time of flowering and then to the frost at the end of the season. So if you're looking at basically something that is a sorghum that it might be short or maybe medium, in many of those situations, our goal is to make sure that they finish before and mature before the first frost. So we need to start looking at, depending on the region of the state, what are the probabilities of having the first frost. And usually, as you know, it might change going from late September to all the way to mid-October, and making sure that you have enough time so we can feed the crop. We usually try to go to something that matures a little bit earlier than the sorghum that we planted as a full season. We also recommend on sorghum, when we are going to double crop, a little bit higher seeding rates. Narrow rows, I would say, is always positive. So if the rainfall is good, and if we have a good rainfall kind of an outlook for the next month, usually narrow rows is never kind of a negative aspect, unless we are really extremely dry. The other concept, connected that is different than soybeans, on sorghum we have basically some need for nitrogen. So right. In this case, it's not like soybeans. Sorghum depends on the nitrogen. And when we are moving from wheat, sometimes the residual nitrogen from wheat crop is almost minimum. And then most of that nitrogen that is on the potential wheat residues is immobilized. So if we can have additional nitrogen application to increase yield in those scenarios, that would be very beneficial. When you're looking at some of the potential yields, we have some research being done the last couple of years, and then if you're looking at the possibility of a really excellent end of the year, the average was around 75 bushels. In many situations, we can extend the duration of the crop, and then we can really go beyond that 75 average, bushels per acre average, that many times we discuss on sorghum.
We appreciate the word on all of this as we're getting closer to those opening rounds of wheat harvest in the state of Kansas. And producers, if they intend to follow that wheat with a double crop, they need to be lining all of this out in advance. Thanks, Ignacio.
Thanks, Eric.
Ignacio Ciampitti, crop production specialist with K-State Research and Extension, on the things to ponder in as far as double cropping after wheat here on Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State Research and Extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
Agriculture Today continues now, and we'll take up what is a tricky circumstance for wheat producers with thin wheat out there, but it's worthy of taking to harvest. However, a late onrush of weeds has infiltrated that stand. And what does one do about that? Not any real easy answers, but we'll go through the alternatives here. With Sarah Lancaster joining us. She's a weed management specialist with K-State Research and Extension. Now, Sarah, before we talk about remedies, what is out there, having weeds in wheat at harvest can be quite problematic when it comes to taking that grain to the elevator, right?
Absolutely. You don't want to have weed seeds in your grain that lead to dockages and reducing already kind of problematic prices for growers. And you also don't want to have green weeds still in your fields that might potentially slow down harvest and cause problems with your mechanical operations.
And if one thinks even further, if one leaves those weeds be, they can proliferate on down the line, can they not?
Absolutely. Managing the soil weed seed bank is something that we need to be very mindful of, Eric, especially as we think about some of the weeds that can come on this time of year, things like pigweeds, for example. So yes, preventing that seed production is very important.
That said, though, what is at a producer's disposal in knocking those weeds out before that wheat is harvested? And you say, unfortunately, the list of alternatives here isn't all that long.
No, it's really not. There's only about 6 or so options for growers to think about, and they really kind of fall into about 4 different groups. So the first group to think about would be 2,4-D and dicamba. Growers are accustomed to using those in wheat for weed management and crop. Those have a similar mode of action, but they do vary a bit in terms of their pre-harvest interval restrictions. So they're both going to go after primarily broadleaf weeds, Eric. So if grass weeds are your problem, 2,4-D or dicamba are not probably the best answer for you. Another option, another sort of group would be to think about AIM or Sharpen. Those two products typically act faster than the other herbicides on our list. So where with dicamba and 2,4-D, you might be looking at, 10 days or 2 weeks before you get good desiccation. With AIM and Sharpen, those weeds are going to die and dry down fairly quickly. Also, something to think about is that on the label, Sharpen actually has the shortest pre-harvest interval. It's only 3 days. The other herbicides on this list are 7 days or longer between the herbicide application and harvest. So there's those two categories. And then the last two, one would be metsulfuron. So again, that's going to act a little slower. And then the other one would be glyphosate. So again, acts a little more slowly. And the other common drawback that those two products share is that we have a lot of weed populations in Kansas that have developed resistance to those two herbicide modes of action. So you need to be familiar with the weeds in your field to know if those will control them or not.
But as you alluded, though, Sarah, the variable that's possibly most important here is that waiting interval following application. One product Sharpen as little as 3 days, but the remainder of those products are anywhere from 7 to 10 days or more.
That is true. And, putting this article together, I had an opportunity to have some pretty interesting conversations and do some research about pre-harvest intervals and residue requirements in wheat crops. So, all of these herbicides have maximum residue limits for the United States, as well as for the various countries that wheat gets exported to. So it's very important that if someone wants to utilize pre-harvest weed control, that they visit with whomever they're selling their grain to make sure that they're using herbicides that will fall under those residue limits, even if they follow all of the proper pre-harvest intervals.
And that's on top of the consideration that those intervals may restrict your ability to manage that land afterward. And this comes back to something we spoke with Ignacio Ciampitti about earlier in the broadcast. Double cropping after wheat, well, these herbicide restrictions are in play there.
Yes. So when we think about recropping intervals, probably the one that would be most problematic would be metsulfuron. So that's an ALS inhibiting herbicide that has the potential to carry over to various crops. When we think about dicamba and 2,4-D, there are some replanting windows there as well, particularly for soybeans. You're looking at 1 to 2 weeks, depending on the rate that you're using and the product that you're using there. Unless, of course, you're using soybeans that are transgenic and have herbicide resistance. And then glyphosate, of course, is not a soil active product.
So that would be a safe bet. But we've been talking about Sharpen as one option. It has a 1-month rotation interval for soybeans specifically. So, again, all of this is on the label, but that's the sort of thing that one has to watch carefully, Sarah.
Yes, absolutely.
There is one other product we haven't mentioned. It's not on your list, and for a reason, although you say you will hear producers bring it up every once in a while. Paraquat as a pre-harvest treatment of weeds in wheat. What's the story behind that?
The story there is don't do it. Even though it's a non-selective, fast-acting herbicide, it's not labeled for pre-harvest use in wheat. So having those paraquat residues on your wheat could potentially get your load of wheat rejected and cause big problems. So it's tempting, but don't do it.
There are legal ramifications to that as well.
There are legal ramifications as well there, yes.
So you don't want to go down that path with paraquat for this sort of treatment. Still, one other angle on this, Sarah, and we talked about this prospect last week with K-State's Justin Wagner, harvesting wheat straw post-harvest as a forage, ammoniating that wheat straw. once again, if there's a herbicide residue on that straw, some considerations come into the picture here too.
Absolutely, Eric. That wheat straw is going to be a harvestable part of that wheat plant. And so just like we have pre-harvest intervals for the grain use, we also have pre-harvest intervals for the straw use. So those vary from one product to the other. And it's very important to make sure that producers are up on the fine points of some of those labels and double check the details that we're providing in this e-update article.
It's pretty obvious studying the label is essential for this project.
Yes, it's not high on everybody's list of favorite things to do, but it's an important thing to do to keep you out of trouble.
So it's really a juggling act here, Sarah, deciding whether or not to treat because of the limitations with the pre-harvest intervals, the other considerations, obviously control potential here, and the fact that it is an additional investment in a crop which might be touch and go anyway. So hard to make this call, isn't it?
It is hard to make this call. There's a lot of economic components in play there, including, the value of that weed control or not having potentially as much weed control in future years, like you mentioned with the seed rain earlier. So, yep, difficult subject.
Have to put a pencil to it at the very minimum here.
Yes.
There is this article in the Agronomy E-Update newsletter this past Friday, Pre-Harvest Weed Control in Wheat. You might reference that. All the products that she talked of here, did Sarah, are in that article listed as to their strengths and their drawbacks. Agronomy.ksu.edu. Click on the E-Update link there. This was posted this past Friday. And before we let you go, just broadly speaking, Sarah, again, back to this topic of double cropping after wheat, irrespective of harvest time weed issues, one needs to get the history of that field in mind as they think about whatever they're going to plant after that wheat.
Absolutely, Eric. So, we talked about replanting options for wheat in an e-update article earlier this spring. And that is a fairly concise reference for the various replanting intervals for different crops, many of which might be double cropped after wheat. So it's important to think about the herbicides that were used this spring and in some cases even last fall on your wheat crop to make sure that you're planting the right crop or the right variety of crop.
So if you need more specifics on that, to recall that conversation and that material from a few weeks back, again, go to the e-update archives at agronomy.ksu.edu. Sarah, as always, we thank you for your time and the input, and we'll catch up with you again soon. Take care.
Thanks, Eric.
Sarah Lancaster aboard on this part of Agriculture Today. Sarah is a weed management specialist with K-State Research and Extension. Again, if you'd like further information, of course, we'd refer you as well to the 2020 Chemical Weed Control Guide. Out of K-State, it thoroughly covers this topic. You can find that publication online at agronomy.ksu.edu. Search for Chemical Weed Control Guide or ask your local extension office about obtaining a copy. And now we'll break away for a few moments. When we return, today's agricultural news headlines coming your way. And once more, standing by with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas, K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven. Still ahead here on the K-State Radio Network. Stay with us. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. You're listening to the K-State Radio Network, and welcome back to Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you for our midweek edition, and on we go now to today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, in its new trade outlook for this fiscal year, the USDA has made only modest changes to its previous forecast for corn exports. Here's more from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
Despite all that's happened since the USDA issued its export forecast back in February, USDA in its new forecast has not dropped its projections for corn exports for this fiscal year, at least not the projections for tonnage. Analysts still calling for shipments to be 47 million tons, 2 million less than 2019, but they have dropped their forecast for the value of those corn exports.
We're projecting corn exports in fiscal 2020 at $8 billion.
USDA's chief economist Rob Johansson says that's down about $500 million from the February forecast and about $1 billion down from last season.
Prices for corn have come down dramatically for a number of reasons. One is that there's less demand for corn in the United States due to the reduction in ethanol production.
Also, there's been a lot of competition this season from other corn-producing nations. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
The Food and Drug Administration has temporarily relieved some restrictions on hand sanitizer produced by ethanol plants. This in an effort to allow companies to continue to maintain supplies amid COVID-19. The ethanol industry has seen its market crash as a result of the pandemic and the economic shutdown. Many ethanol producers, however, began selling alcohol for sanitizer production and producing sanitizer themselves. In May, the FDA began to restrict ethanol plants producing sanitizer because of concerns about hazardous chemicals in the end product coming from plants. The FDA first sent out its guidance to alcohol producers back in late March. It did greenlight more alcohol-based sanitizer from ethanol producers. Then the agency changed the rules in an April 15 guidance. That guidance stated that fuel-grade ethanol needed to meet specific grade requirements and be screened for impurities. Ethanol plants would have to submit information to the FDA on impurity levels because it does not meet specific standards. On Monday, the FDA said it will ease those restrictions. The FDA will allow ethanol plants to temporarily produce sanitizer that has higher levels of acetaldehyde, which the FDA originally said in the temporary policy appears to be genotoxic when in direct contact with tissues. In addition, the agency will temporarily allow 2 parts per million of benzene. Renewable Fuels Association President and CEO Jeff Cooper said that those changes likely would not result in increased sanitizer production. He said the FDA's new limits on impurities are 8 times more restrictive than what's typically found in a glass of red wine and 20 times more restrictive than what's been allowed in hand sanitizer in Canada, while Cooper says the U.S. continues to significantly ramp up imports of hand sanitizer from China and other countries. The Kansas Livestock Foundation has awarded 28 scholarships totaling $31,000 for the 2021 school year. Scarlett Higgins tells us here that 9 of the winners received cartridges for cash scholarships.
5 students attending the Kansas State University College of Veterinary Medicine each were given a $1,500 scholarship. Recipients of the stipends include Lauren Hurd of Wichita, daughter of David Hurd and Susan and Russ Bauer, Sarah Kruger from Lebo, daughter of Joyce and Dwight Kruger, Leah Metzger of Towanda, daughter of Bob Metzger and Jill Olson, Jason Payne from Hutchinson, son of David and Colleen Payne, and McKaylee Woodward of St. George, daughter of Jude and Mindy Wilson. 4 undergraduate students attending K-State were awarded $1,000 Merck cartridges for cash scholarships. Tyler Bodorf from Galena will be a senior and is the daughter of Todd and Shelley Bodorf. Zachary Busing of Baileyville is the son of Bruce and Michelle Busing. He will be a senior this fall. Katie Leibarger of Garnett also will be a senior and is the daughter of Dave and Myra Leibarger. Emma McClure from Hugoton is the daughter of Joel and Karen McClure. She will be a junior at K-State in the fall. Cartridges for cash scholarships are funded by empty Ralgro and Revlor cartridges being turned in to Merck representatives, taken to a KLA meeting, or brought to the KLA Convention and Trade Show in Wichita in December. Each cartridge is worth 25 cents. I'm Scarlett Higgins.
Cattle Producers Set for Midday Tomorrow is a K-State webinar that will help you beef cattle operators make management decisions in light of Kansas' current weather patterns, ranging from flooding to drought and calf market volatility following COVID-19. The K-State Department of Animal Sciences and Industry and K-State Research and Extension will be hosting this webinar via Zoom tomorrow at noon. K-State Beef Systems Specialist Justin Wagner.
We're going to have a weather outlook from Mary Knapp, our climatologist at K-State, kind of going over both kind of the local situation as well as some of the natural picture. You know, the other thing that we've had lots of discussions about in our group at the K-State Beef Extension team is we know that we've got a lot of heavier cattle on feed, and as we come into the summer months, you know, heat stress can be very real, and its impacts are often felt the hardest on those larger weight cattle that have been on feed the longest. And so Dr. A.J. Tarpoff, our extension beef cattle veterinarian, is going to cover some management tips in terms of heat stress, as well as some of the cattle comfort tools that we've got available to producers at K-State and how to use those. You know, as we begin to look forward, and I think, you know, it's a part of this current market situation is, you know, if we are going to look at early weaning a set of calves, what does that market look like in the fall? So Dr. Dale Blasi is going to run several scenarios with the beef basis tools that are out there and look at what those marketing options really might be in terms of as we look at weaning this 2020 spring calf crop later this fall.
K-State's Justin Wagner there. Again, this webinar will take place tomorrow at noon on Zoom, and you can still register, but do so right away at ksubeef.org. ksubeef.org. We hope you'll take advantage of that opportunity. And briefly here, the K-State Animal Sciences and Industry Department has announced it will host the 2020 Dr. Bob Hines Kansas Swine Classic online, including a showmanship contest, prospect and market hog shows, a skill-a-thon, and a photo contest for youth ages 7 through 18. Find out more about that at asi.ksu.edu. asi.ksu.edu. This is Agriculture Today.
Social distancing slows the spread of coronavirus, so if you have a fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going in. More info at coronavirus.gov. Let's all do our part, because we're all #alone together. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
Reverie, of course, means state of dreamy meditation.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
It did take a long time before the gas tanks were empty. We had not driven anywhere, but now we had to fill up. Anneke pulled up first and I parked behind her. We went through the necessary steps. Do not retract your cart, etc. After the Toyota had pulled away, a truck pulled up on the other side of the pump. The driver stepped out, put face mask and gloves on, and went through the same steps I did. My eyes glanced to the truck, a clean, well-cared-for vehicle with a huge imprint of a mother holding a healthy baby. Looking at it, I remembered our children when they were babies, beautiful, chubby, and loved as obvious this baby was. I remarked, "That is a beautiful and happy baby." That's all I said. The driver laughed, and turning to me, she said, "Where are you from?" It took me off guard, so I said again, "That is a gorgeous baby." She repeated her question with a big smile on her face. "Where are you from?" I told her I was from the Netherlands. She tipped off the tank, put the lid on, and wished me a happy day. I did the same and added, "Have a safe day." And off the truck went with the picture of the happy mother and happy baby. What a splendid advertisement. But the question she asked, where are you from, stuck with me. I had only said a few words. What if I'd been from Minnesota or New York? After all these years, of which 46 in Kansas, I've spoken English, Aussie English, then American English since 1959. It's amazing. Where are you from? My daughter Talina, who lives in Amsterdam and who speaks Dutch, probably with an American accent, sent me a photo on the computer which intrigued me. It was a photo of a big white and black house and manor on the corner of Marnix Street in Amsterdam. It was a beautiful house. Several floors up, a poem had been painted on the wall. I think most of us know the short poem. It's typically, at least for me, a Kansas poem written by Emily Dickinson. And I wonder how many people have stopped, looked up, and read it. Right now, with so much less traffic going by, it might be safe to stand still, look up, and read it. Then after reading it, what do you think? Who placed it there? Remember, you're standing on Marnix Street in Amsterdam, a city founded around 1270. Of course, the house is from much more recent time. Amsterdam started as a simple fishing village, and a dam built across the river Amstel. It was low and swampy land. Many old houses along the canals are built on top of pillars driven into the marshy ground up to 59 feet until they hit solid ground. It was wet, and water is still anywhere. But here's the poem. To make a prairie, it takes a clover and a bee. One clover and one bee, and reverie. The reverie alone will do if bees are few. Emily Dickinson. If I stood there and would read that, with all the traffic, cars, trucks, trams, bicyclists, and pedestrians going around me, my mind would instantly take me home to the Flint Hills, to our farm with the rangeland and 365-degree circle view and the stillness, the sounds of grazing cows taking their bites of the sweet prairie grasses. Then looking down, I would see the bee. Bees on the forbs bending over as bees drone from one to another. It only takes one bee and reverie. And if bees are few, the reverie alone will do. Maybe after a truck screeched by me, honking his horn, would I wake up? Or maybe a passerby would gently touch me on the shoulder and ask me, where are you from? Reverie, of course, means state of dreamy meditation or fanciful musing. Lost in reverie, a daydream, a fantastic visionary, or impractical idea. There you stand in Amsterdam dreaming. May I ask you, where are you from? Amsterdam was not connected with the North Sea. Only when canals were dug to the sea did it become a cornerstone to the Dutch economy. It's the second largest harbor in the Netherlands. Rotterdam harbor is bigger, or at least it was, and I expect it still is. Presently, with the coronavirus, Amsterdam has become the city for the people who live there, the Amsterdam people. With the silence of no tourists, the city experienced a breather of coming to its senses, maybe of reverie. Those of you who have visited the old city of Amsterdam will remember the push of tourists, the crowds. Amsterdam is asking itself, what have we learned from this crisis? How can we improve the living in the city for the joy of its own people? So there will be time to stop and look up and read poetry painted on the wall of a house. read it in reverie. Where are you from? I am from Kansas.
Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas, featured every Wednesday right here. Our time's away for today. As always, thanks for listening in, and please be back with us right here this same time tomorrow. Until then, Eric Atkinson bidding you a good day for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.